So usually, when we talk about currency like paying off a debt or just making a trade, there's this expectation of separation.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's a medium of exchange that's entirely outside of yourself.
Exactly. You reach into your wallet, you hand over $1, and you walk away. The currency is external. Your core identity is totally intact.
Yeah, the transaction doesn't require a piece of your actual being.
Right. But then you step into the world of intense religious rhetoric, and suddenly the wallet is it's gone. We're looking at a landscape today where the currency, the very thing being traded to settle this unfathomable cosmic debt, is you.
It's a massive shift in perspective.
It really is. So welcome to today's Deep Dive. Our mission today is an intensive textual analysis of a single, highly concentrated primary source. We are looking at a transcribed prayer from Reverend Sun Myung Moon.
Yes.
It's dated December 12, 1956, and it's titled Sacrificial Devotion, a Prayer for Divine Dominion.
And just to set the stage for you listening, we are examining this 1956 text strictly as a historical document, right? It's an artifact of persuasion.
Right, exactly.
Our goal here isn't to endorse this theology or, take sides on any religious ideologies. We're impartially unpacking the mechanics of the language itself.
Because the language is just fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
We want to see how this vivid imagery and these intense concepts of sacrifice are structurally designed to completely redefine the relationship between humanity, history, and the divine.
Yeah, the text essentially attempts to completely rewire how a person views their own existence. So, okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start exactly where the text begins, which establishes this extreme baseline of devotion. The speaker is pleading for the, quote, Father to take dominion over them. And then we get this incredible line. They state that their minds and bodies must become sacrifices, quote, like the gold, frankincense, and myrrh given by the wise men from the East.
Yeah, and that rhetoric, it immediately invokes a universally recognizable narrative, right? High value, reverence, the nativity story.
Right.
But the text fundamentally alters the mechanics of that story.
How so? Because usually, when we think of those gifts, we picture material wealth, exotic, expensive items carried in little wicker boxes.
Exactly. But here, the human self actually is the gold in this scenario.
Which is wild to think about. Swapping physical wealth for literal minds and bodies. How does that alter the psychological state of the person reciting this prayer?
Well, the key psychological mechanism here is the deliberate objectification of the believer.
Objectification.
Yeah, think about it. When an emissary brings gold to a monarch, they place it at the monarch's feet and they step back. The gold possesses no agency,
Right. It doesn't have desires or an independent will.
Exactly. It belongs entirely to the sovereign now. To melt down or trade or just hoard in a treasury. By equating the living mind and body with inanimate objects of tribute, the prayer structurally demands the total surrender of autonomy.
Wow. So the individual is no longer an independent actor in their own life.
Right. They have rhetorically transformed themselves into an item of currency.
And an item of currency that is deeply, deeply terrified of being rejected, I might add.
Yes, that's a crucial part of the text.
Because right after offering themselves up like gold, the speaker says, we earnestly hope and desire that you will not allow us to become abominations before the altar.
That specific word is so heavy.
Abomination. It's so visceral, right?
The stakes established by that single word are absolute. It reveals that the baseline emotion driving this prayer is this intense existential vulnerability.
It's not just like hoping the divine will accept a humble offering.
No, not at all. It's the raw terror of being fundamentally repulsive to the creator.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. It actually makes me think of like a biological organ transplant.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because it's not a matter of the surgeon just deciding they don't prefer the look of the new kidney or whatever. It's the fear of violent biological rejection. The body recognizing the foreign tissue as something incompatible, something dangerous, and then actively attacking it.
Yeah.
The person praying is terrified that their soul is that incompatible tissue on the altar.
That transplant analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanism here. Because an abomination in ancient scriptural contexts, it isn't just a mistake. It's an impurity that actively taints the sacred space simply by existing within it.
Oh, wow.
So the believer is positioning themselves entirely at the mercy of this divine judge, operating from the assumption that their default state is inherently toxic to the sacred.
Inherently toxic.
Yeah.
Which begs the question, if you are terrified of being that incompatible toxic tissue, How do you guarantee the divine system won't reject you?
And the text answers that by moving from the physical offering of the body to the internal preparation of the mind.
Right. The rhetoric dictates that a flawed human can't simply approach the altar in their natural state.
Exactly. They have to undergo a process of systematic psychological erasure.
And this is where the text states, quote, "We have let go of all our rituals, concepts, and insistence on ideology."
Mm-hmm.
The speaker actually calls themselves unworthy selves who are contrite about their insufficiency. They ask the Father to take responsibility for everything and to receive our minds and bodies completely.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me, because I read that line and immediately saw this glaring contradiction.
Okay, let's examine that friction. What stood out to you?
Well, they claim we have let go of all our rituals, concepts, and insistence on ideology. But, I mean, a highly structured transcribed prayer is inherently a ritual.
Right.
And petitioning a deity to take absolute dominion over humanity is a massive overarching ideology.
Oh, absolutely.
So how can a religious text effectively persuade a follower that they are abandoning ideology while simultaneously demanding they participate in one?
It's a great point. The text is utilizing the rhetoric of the blank slate, which is an incredibly powerful tool for ideological assimilation.
A blank slate.
Yeah. The contradiction you noticed is resolved within the internal logic of the text by redefining what an ideology or a ritual actually is.
Okay, so how do they redefine it?
In this framework, concepts and ideologies are defined strictly as frameworks originating from the human ego. Anything human-made is flawed, it's insufficient, and it's highly likely to result in becoming that abomination we discussed earlier.
Oh, I see. So it's like demolishing a structurally compromised building down to the bedrock before you construct a fortress.
Yes.
You can't just build the new walls on top of the rotten wood of the old house.
Demolition is the exact intent. By claiming extreme humility, calling themselves unworthy selves, and expressing deep insufficiency, the speaker is actively creating a psychological vacuum.
Right.
The text frames human intellect and personal belief systems not as assets, but as liabilities that separate the believer from the divine.
Because if your own logic is inherently flawed, relying on it is incredibly dangerous.
Exactly. And this brings us to the core psychological comfort that's actually embedded in this self-abasement.
Comfort. That sounds counterintuitive.
Well, think about it. Operating an independent human life requires constant decision-making, moral calculations, and just the persistent anxiety of making the wrong choice, right?
Oh, definitely. Decision fatigue is a real thing.
The text uses the believer's sense of unworthiness as the logical justification to stop making those choices.
Wow.
Surrendering your mind and body isn't framed as losing your freedom. It's framed as cognitive offloading. You are being relieved of the agonizing burden of your own flawed nature.
That is wild.
Asking God to take responsibility for everything is a profoundly effective way to neutralize the anxiety of existence.
So you wipe the slate clean, you hand over the deed to the property, and you say, I am no longer liable for what happens next.
Precisely.
The believer is completely emptied out. But, nature abhors a vacuum. Once the individual ego is demolished, what fills that empty space?
That's the pivot.
Yeah, this is where the scope of the prayer expands in a way that shifts everything. We go from this hyper-focused internal psychological erasure to a sudden outward explosion of cosmic time.
The text pivots from the microcosm of the individual to the macrocosm of human history.
Right. The prayer asks to embrace the history of 6,000 years. And the reason given is just fascinating. It's to, quote, comfort your anguished heart.
And they are speaking directly to God here.
Yes. The text claims God has toiled through the long course of history and toiled in ways known to none in order to love humanity.
This recharacterization of the divine is the structural fulcrum of the entire text. It changes everything.
It really does. Because we usually hear narratives where humans are the ones suffering on earth.
Yeah.
We deal with war, famine, disease, and we look up to the divine for comfort or for a rescue.
Right.
But this text flips the script entirely. Here, God is the one who is exhausted. God has the anguished heart. God is the one secretly laboring in the background while humanity remains completely oblivious.
The rhetorical function here is the weaponization of empathy.
Weaponization of empathy. I like that phrase.
The text is engineering a specific emotional response to bind the believer to the cause. Consider the standard hierarchical view of the divine, an omnipotent, untouchable sovereign sitting on a throne.
Yeah, thunderbolts and judgment.
Right. A believer might fear that sovereign or revere them, but the relationship is based on power. This prayer dismantles that sovereign imagery and replaces it with the imagery of an anguished, suffering parent.
It forces you to look at the divine not as a boss demanding a report, but as a parent who has been secretly working 3 grueling jobs for decades just to keep the lights on for you.
Exactly. And the psychological shift there is immense. If you discover your parent has suffered in secret to provide for you, your reaction is no longer basic obedience.
Oh, the skill.
It's a crushing, overwhelming sense of debt. You realize that your very existence has been subsidized by someone else's agony.
And we really need to ground this in the historical moment of the text for you listening. This is 1956. We are looking at a post-Korean War context. The audience for this rhetoric has intimately experienced devastation, loss, and profound historical trauma.
That context is vital for understanding why this language is so effective. When a population has endured massive geopolitical and personal suffering, there is an intense psychological need to make that suffering mean something.
Right. It can't just be random chaos.
Exactly. By stating that God has been toiling in ways known to none through the history of 6,000 years, the text validates human suffering by elevating it. The trauma isn't just senseless violence, it's part of a grand cosmic endurance test that even the Creator is enduring alongside them.
It bridges the gap between the devastation of the 1950s and the beginning of time itself. It tells the listener, your pain is real, but look at the pain of the Creator. And this immense empathy isn't just supposed to make the believer feel guilty, though. It acts as the ultimate catalyst. It transitions the prayer from a state of passive surrender into an incredibly aggressive call to action.
Because empathy without action is just sorrow. The text masterfully channels that sorrow into a highly specific cosmic duty.
So the text reveals the source of the Creator's anguish. It states that the enmity of this people and the enmity of all humankind has literally penetrated into heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Heaven is lamenting because, and this is the absolute crux of the text, there is no one to become a sacrifice representing the anguish of heaven and earth.
The altar of history is entirely empty.
The altar is empty. God has been suffering for 6,000 years. Heaven is lamenting, and there is a vacancy for a sacrifice. So the speaker asks to become the sons and daughters who will entreat God to resolve this enmity. They literally ask to come forward and fight Satan in your stead.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? The language shifts from a humble offering of gold to like a cosmic legal proxy.
A legal proxy, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's like discovering your family has been fighting a devastating, multi-generational legal battle that has just bankrupted and exhausted your ancestors. Instead of walking away, you walk into the courtroom. You step in front of the exhausted patriarch and you say, I am taking over as the primary plaintiff. I will fight this in your stead.
That proxy analogy illuminates the sheer audacity of the prayer's logic perfectly. It's a fascinating study in how rhetoric can simultaneously strip a person of all worth and yet elevate them to ultimate importance.
Right.
We've tracked how the believers surrendered their mind, body, concepts, and ideology. They accepted the label of an unworthy abomination.
They hit rock bottom.
But the direct result of that total self-annihilation is that they are now positioned as the sole champion of the universe. They are the only mechanism by which the Creator's 6,000-year anguish can be resolved.
So you are nothing, but because you are nothing, you are the only instrument pure enough for God to wield against the ultimate evil.
Exactly. This complex intertwining of worthlessness and cosmic essentiality leads to the final and perhaps most challenging concept in the text.
Oh, the liberation part.
Yes. After petitioning to step onto this cosmic battlefield as God's proxy, the speaker asks for their mind and body to be brought into perfect harmony. And the stated reward for this ultimate unified sacrifice is to bow before God and sing the blessing of liberation.
Which honestly feels completely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I mean, how can a text that spends its entirety demanding the absolute surrender of autonomy, begging for divine dominion, conclude that the ultimate reward is liberation?
Well, we have to evaluate the definition of liberation through the framework the text has built for us.
Okay.
In modern secular frameworks, liberation is typically defined as the maximization of personal choice, right? The freedom to do what you want, when you want, how you want.
Yeah, freedom of self-determination. But earlier we talked about how the text views the human intellect and human choice as the very things that make us abominations.
Precisely. In the logic of this 1956 prayer, personal choice is not freedom. Personal choice is a prison of error, anxiety, and historical failure.
Wow.
If your natural state is flawed, then being left to your own devices is the ultimate danger. Therefore, liberation is not the freedom to choose, it is the freedom from having to choose.
Oh, man. So if you are perfectly aligned with the divine will, if your mind and body are just instruments functioning exactly as the Creator intends, there is no more doubt. There's
Well,
no more fear of failure. You don't have to agonize over your purpose because your purpose is absolute and undeniable.
The paradox basically resolves itself. Absolute submission to a perfect divine will is presented as the only logical escape from the tyranny of human imperfection.
The tyranny of human imperfection.
Yeah. Liberation is achieved when the individual ego ceases to resist the cosmic objective. You are free because you have become functionally indistinguishable from the will of the universe.
That's wow. Looking back at the architecture of this text, the journey it takes the reader on is incredibly intricate.
It really is a masterclass in rhetorical structure.
Yeah. We started with the concept of the individual offering their physical mind and body as currency, mirroring the gold and myrrh of ancient kings, driven by the biological terror of being rejected as an abomination.
And then we observed how the text systematically demolished the internal self, instructing the believer to discard all rituals and ideologies to create that psychological vacuum, relieving them of the burden of their own intellect.
And once that vacuum was created, it was filled with the crushing empathetic weight of a 6,000-year historical debt. It fundamentally changed the image of God from an untouchable king to an anguished, secretly toiling parent.
Which ultimately catalyzed the believer to step onto the cosmic battlefield. They offer themselves as the missing sacrifice, adopting the role of a divine proxy to fight Satan and finding their profound liberation in the complete forfeiture of their autonomy.
Understanding the mechanics behind this kind of historical rhetoric gives us a much sharper lens for examining how language shapes belief. It reveals how persuasion can be structured to ask a human being for total submission, not by threatening them, but by offering them the most grandiose, universe-saving purpose in return.
It demonstrates that the most effective persuasion doesn't just change what a person thinks, it changes the foundational premise of who they believe they are in relation to history.
Absolutely. Before we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you listening with a final thought to mull over, something that builds directly on the logic we just explored.
Okay.
The text explicitly argues that heaven is lamenting because it currently lacks a human sacrifice. The entire cosmic war is at a stalemate until a human being willingly steps forward to fight in God's stead.
The divine is presented as fundamentally reliant on human participation to resolve the enmity.
Right. So if human beings are positioned as the only entities capable of climbing onto that altar and breaking the 6,000-year stalemate, if the creator of the universe is functionally paralyzed and anguished until a human willingly becomes the currency, does that ultimately place the true power to shape the universe's destiny in the hands of the omnipotent creator? Or, within the hidden architecture of this rhetoric, does it place the ultimate power in the hands of the sacrifice,